Well, joining us to discuss these developments is Yulia Kazdabina, a senior fellow at the Ukrainian Prism, joining us from Kyiv. Julia, the first thing I want to talk about is something we opened the show with, looking at the amount of aid that has been pledged by Ukraine's allies. $21 billion in aid for Ukrainian military supplies. How significant is that move?
Well, that is a quite significant move, although most likely it's not going to be sufficient to actually win in the war, right? So Ukraine will be able to sustain the fight and to send a signal to the Russian Federation that it cannot overcome Ukraine, but most likely it's going to strengthen Ukraine's position, but not enable it to win the war.
Yes, absolutely, Yulia. And looking ahead to this meeting between Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin, though nothing major is expected, how important is it that the US continue putting pressure on Russia to look towards a peace deal, as general consensuses are that there is not much movement and there isn't much expected in the immediate future?
Well, it is important that the U.S. stays engaged, and because at least the U.S. is learning its lessons. Because if you remember, just very shortly into President Trump's presidency, he was saying that, President Zelensky was to blame for this war, and he was refusing to call the war Russian aggression. Now they're learning their lessons when Ukraine agreed immediately to a complete ceasefire, and Russia keeps refusing to agree to a ceasefire. So this sends a very clear signal who the aggressor is. And maybe at least the hope is in Ukraine that this is going to impact the way the U.S. behaves, because everybody was appalled to see the U.S. reopen relations and to draw closer to the Russian Federation, knowing everything that Russia has done and keeps doing in Ukraine. But it's important that they stay engaged and they actually figure out the real situation.
Yes, looking at this meeting that's been taking place in Brussels today, a continuation of unity from Kyiv's allies. How important is it that these nations don't stop in their support, given the fact that peace and diplomatic efforts from the US seem to be slightly stalling?
It is important for Ukraine, and if you listen to what they're discussing providing air defense for Ukraine. They're discussing providing landmines to Ukraine. So those are the means for Ukraine to be able to defend itself, because now the situation has improved at least a little bit. We have seen fewer strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. They do not hit major Ukrainian energy infrastructure nodes, but we understand clearly that they have enough capacity to restart at any point. And so it's very important for Ukraine to be able to protect itself, because winter is coming, and winters in Ukraine tend to be rather cold, and if there is no energy production, then it's going to be very miserable for Ukrainians. And so keeping support from Europeans and being able to keep defending ourselves is very important for us.
Yes, Julia, and bringing an end to our discussion, how significant is it that Steve Witkoff makes clear the US aims and what Ukraine need in order for peace to be agreed, and to make sure that that is at the forefront of Russia's mind, considering there seems to be a general understanding that peace in the immediacy isn't possible?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the question. Sorry.
Apologies. Just in terms of Steve Witkoff and his role in these negotiations and really pushing home the US desire for peace, something that Ukraine have also spoken about. How important is it that that message is clear and is put forward?
It is important for that message to be clear, but I mean, the interview that we've seen with Steve Witkoff to Tucker Carlson some time ago, it was very confused messages, and it was not something that should be told to the Russian Federation. The things he was saying were a total, if not a total, but to a large degree, this was a distortion of the truth when he was saying that people in the currently occupied regions of Ukraine, that they voted to be a part of Russia. Nothing like that happened. I mean, what happened was that Russia actually moved into those regions, and there were protests against Russian occupation, and then they started killing people. And when they took those areas under their control, they staged something that they called a referendum, but that has nothing to do with a referendum. Like Ukrainians living in those areas never wanted to be a part of Russia, and so there are multiple other messages in that interview that came from him that were echoing Russian propaganda. And so in a way, it's important for somebody to come and negotiate and to send the message that the war has to stop. But on the other hand, if Mr. Witkoff wants to do it, and if he wants to play a positive role, he cannot be repeating Russian lies.
Julia Kostabina, thank you very much for joining us and providing your insight.